And of course I have to get a bill with it too. But art is in the intellect, not in the fingers, they're just the instruments. But that has been called the most perfect of all instruments. So intelligence is the basic grasp, or understanding, the basic grasp of principles. Synthesis is the basic grasp of practical principles. So from this we draw conclusions, and then we get science. We can go to ultimate conclusions. We have wisdom. Practical principles, they're the speculative principles. Synthesis are practical principles. For instance, there's no subordination without coordination in the practical order, in the political order, for instance. Prudence is knowing how we ought to do. Art is how we ought to make. It's the philosophy of technology, the philosophy of art, the philosophy of what's it called again? I can't think of the word for a second. But that's all those things associated with art. Medicine is an art, dentistry is an art, engineering is an art, which uses sciences, of course. And it's my judgment that I've not had any contradiction on this. Wisdom and prudence. That's what every student should get, at least. The ultimate analysis, that should be taught to be prudent and to understand wisdom. But wisdom is very poor in the world today. By the way, before I forget, are the two ladies coming back? They
went to the vending machines downstairs.
Oh, I see. I must have your email address to send you the text. It's free of charge, of course, to everybody. You get it off the email. Yes?
What did you say was speculative, the ones on top?
Yes. They're the ones knowing for the sake of knowing. The practical ones are knowing for the sake of doing. Now, these habits of the intellect, they're what we call the intellectual habits, or the intellective habits. Then there are the practical virtues. This is the practical virtues. And the practical intellect. Now they're called the intellectual virtues. But we have temperance. These are the moral virtues, also known as the cardinal virtues. Temperance, fortitude. In other words, temperance is about pleasurable goods. Fortitude is about difficult goods. And finally, justice. These two are individual virtues. This is a social virtue. We spent a thorough development of these at graduate level. Boy, that was very, very detailed. Now, that's all very well. We should be just, we should be prudent, we should be just, have great fortitude, and be temperate. But that's all very nice and hairy-fairy up in the air. What if I'm caught in this situation here and now? How am I going to be just? Supposing I find a pencil left in the class. Am I going to send to Paris newspapers, London newspapers, New York newspapers to say, did anybody lose a pencil? We need a virtue to help us in the virtues, application of them here and now. Can anybody tell me what that virtue is?
Prudence.
Prudence, exactly. So prudence, you can see why I call it a very important virtue. I've got to be temperate here and now. Supposing my physician, which they just did, diagnosed I'm anemic. All right, now I have to, and yet at the same time I've got mild adult type 2 diabetes. They say eat a lot of this and don't eat a lot of that. Well, how am I going to do that? I've got to be prudent and make sure I eat which one as I eat, etc., etc. I don't go looking for railway tracks the iron and start chewing them. But prudence tells me how to act here and now. Forgive me for using my own case. I have to do that because I don't know your case. But justice, how to be just here and now. Fortitude, how to be brave here and now. What's a man, a commander of, say, 22 troops? In Australia, that's a, what's it called?
Squad.
No.
Battalion.
No, it's too big. Pardon?
Platoon.
Platoon, thank you. It's a platoon. So, what is he? A lieutenant's in charge of this platoon. What's he going to say? There are 1,000 Iraqis there. All right, boys, let's go for them. He might be more prudent to withdraw. It's how to be brave here and now. So that's what the prudence does. Tells us that whatever it's here and now. So that's why it's so important for children to have education. And the only way you learn it is by practice. St. Thomas says in his work, prudentia est providere. To be prudent is to have foresight. Look ahead. You know what the old saying is? Count 10, then hit him on the head with a watermelon. So there's the matter of education, true education. This, kids are encouraged to be intemperate today. And if you want to be pro-life or anything, get out of this. You've got no place here. I remember, do you remember the governor's, what was it? Conference in, oh, it's about 25 years ago. They had on the family or something, conference. And I was asked by pro-life people to go to this conference. It's in Niagara Falls in the convention centre, wasn't it, I think? I've forgotten now what it was called. I must phone Anne Gallagher. She was with me at that time. We were in different groups. And a woman endocrinologist from New York. Now that qualifies her. She knows more about philosophy than a philosopher would. She's an endocrinologist. What did she do? She nastily turned to me and said, "You're in the wrong group." I said, "No, madam, you are." And I must be proud to say 3 black women stood very steadfastly with me on the point I was defending, on the side of truth. But the white women were obviously taking advantage of the situation. Opportunity seekers they were, the white women. It was the 3 black women who had a better sense of values, I found. But it was on something like this. I've forgotten the exact business now. But this woman with her black beady eyes turned on me and said, "You're in the wrong group. What are you doing here?" I said, "I'm here and I'm staying here." So, true education, as I said, these are the personal virtues, 1, 2, and 3. We spent a whole semester studying them, the detail. And I translated Father Sylves's beautiful treatise on the relationship between the intellect, the will, the virtues, vices, and the passions. It's a psychologist's or a psychiatrist's delight if he only knew it. But few will ever see it. I drew organisation out. He just had it all running together in 10 pages. And I thought it was, I don't know why he did it that way, to save money or something, but I translated it from the French and Latin into English and spread it out over 30 pages. It's a beautiful thing. Anybody have a copy if they want to copy it? Anyway, so there's what education does. Brings out of the person their ability to be prudent. Prudent in all the matters. It's easy to say, "Oh yes, I'm temperate, I don't drink this, and I don't chase girls, I don't do this, I don't do that." Yeah, but what about here and now, when the opportunity comes? How do you act? That's the big thing. How should I act here and now? Etc., etc. Or, here we are, we're all lost in the jungle or something, and one person's impeding us. How should we do? Should we just put a bullet in them and then go ahead and get our ways out of the jungle or out of the forest or whatever it is? And ultimate things, wisdom. Certain knowledge about ultimate causes. Science is certain knowledge of causes, but wisdom is certain knowledge of ultimate causes. How should we act? So, I've got a small bibliography there for you, Father Conway's book particularly. I was very sad when Pierre Conway died in the last 18 months, I think. I stay at the House of Studies of the Dominican Fathers in Washington when I go there. It's a very expensive place, $40 a night, all meals, bedroom. In Washington, that's fantastic, isn't it? But I don't have most of my meals. I have them with the Academy of Sciences, of which I'm a vice president, of course. But I think we've said enough on that. Now we come to chapter 12, the efficient cause of man. Now remember what we're doing. We're analysing man in terms of 4 causes. We went into it before we realised this, and we're looking back on it. We have seen what he's made of, matter and form, body and soul. We've seen what he is intended for, happiness, the ultimate, that's the final cause. Now we want to take about his efficient cause, what brought him into being. And of course, there have been a lot of talk about this on radio and television, or mainly television in recent times. And Dr. Bonnet has been fighting battles on this. He talked to me the other night about some of this. The attacks on the existence of God and the defense of evolution have become very intense in recent few years. Excuse me. The existence of God, the existence of a soul, but when you hear the discussion, there's no mention of the proofs. It's all a blind faith. I mentioned about the man who condemned the induction of Vietnamese into Australia. And he didn't want them to come into Australia because his big objection was, this took place in Australia, this discussion, is that they were mostly Catholics. He said, I'm an atheist myself. Well, he avoided the discussion. I said, how do you account for the proofs of the existence of God? There aren't any. I'm sorry, but I've been teaching them for many years. I let him know I was ready to defend them. Let's change the subject. He didn't want to know the truth, he just wanted to be right. That's all. So now we discuss evolution. My brother, who's an engineer, he described the car, the motor car, as the excellent use of a bad principle. You know, in the cylinders, they have a compression of gasoline and oxygen. It's burnt, ignites, and a gentle explosion. If it explodes too quickly, it goes ping, 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 and that gentle explosion expands, the gases expand and pushes the piston up and down again. And it's a crude principle, just the explosion of gasoline in air. But it's a magnificent use of it, the way it's put together. Discussing this in the context at the time of the Rover car in Great Britain, which is made by the what's the great the great princely car, you know, the one that they
Bentley.
no, Rolls-Royce. That's it. Thank you. I had the privilege of once being going along the road, my wife and I, in a Rolls-Royce car, and I felt like royalty going down a main road. You could have put a pencil there, and it would have stood on its end and not moved. It was so smooth. Of course, there was the story told of a man who took his car on the continent of Europe from Great Britain, something you can do easily, and he was in Switzerland and broke an axle. Contacted, nobody could fix it. Contacted Great Britain, and they said, we'll send a man out. They sent an engineer out to fix it with an axle. And then when he came back, he said, I want the bill. For what? For the broken axle. Sir, axles don't break in the Rolls-Royce. They wouldn't charge him because that'd be bad for their reputation. So we come now to the possibility of evolution of man from lower animals. Let me put, first of all, somewhat the scientific evidence that's put forward. They say it appears that way. Man develops out of these lower things by all sorts of things. And experiments, as I saw in the British Museum, are supposed to prove it. Now, one of the things, for instance, they showed that ammonium carbamate, rather a complex thing, ammonium carbamate, that should be an M there. When it's treated by electricity, it forms urea. First of all, this can be formed from a mixture of ammonia, water, and carbon dioxide by treating it electrically, and it turns into ammonium carbamate. Then ammonium carbonate, when treated again by electricity, can turn into urea, which is found in living substance. We're supposed to excrete about an ounce of 30 grams something of urea each person each day. So they think there's evidence of what electricity can do. But just, my friends, each of those substances is heteromotive, not automotive. No imminent action. It's still only transitive action, which non-living things, as we saw, perform. There's no imminent action about that. We do imminent actions. We use these things, urea, but they're non-living things. So their idea of evolution is that a non-living becomes a living. Let's put that on the board for a second. I sometimes wonder at how naive people are. Like those things we're talking about, the plants. When they tried to convince children, because only a child would fall for that. But it's non-living, living becomes a living thing. How? God only knows. And I mean that two ways. Then plant life becomes brute life. And in the British Museum, in the science section, natural history, there it is, beautifully laid out. And New York City, laid out, this is what happened. Goes to brute life. Then brute life, in other words, non-rational animal life, goes to human life. They don't like being pinned down like this. This is non-living substance and can only perform transitive activity, cannot perform imminent activity. This is imminent life, imminent activity, and is singly automotive. Remember the three requirements? There's the exercise of the act. There's the exercise plus form of the act. There's the exercise plus form plus purpose. Animals can merely exercise the act. Plants can brutes can do the exercise of the act for themselves and specify the form. The dog sees the hare, so he gives himself the form, what he's going to chase. Or he sees the car, he chases the car. Man can give himself the exercise, the form, and the purpose. What's he going to do? Have lunch with Fifi? So he exercises the act. He gives himself the form. Have lunch. What's his purpose? It may be to seduce her. It may be because it's a business meeting, a business proposition. It may be arrange a committee meeting. It could be all sorts of things. And that's where man's freedom comes in. So, what do non-living things do? They can only do transitive actions. One thing can move the other. They can't do imminent actions, non-living things. That's what characterizes their distinction. We saw that at the beginning in very great detail. What can plants do? They're singly automotive, singly self-moving. All they can do is do the act. Nutrition, growth, and generation. Carry the acts out. Brutes can give themselves the form. So you've got a thing going that's singly automotive, somehow magically becomes something that is doubly automotive. Then a doubly automotive becomes a trebly automotive. It's extraordinary. Two biologists in the University of Ottawa. I was living at the home of one of them at the time. In the basement he had an apartment and I was occupying that. And they said there was having a couple of them were going to try an experiment that day, give a lecture and criticise each other. He said, if you'd like to come along, you'd be very welcome. So I said, I will, Mike. They asked would I like to try. And they've dealt with something like this. They'd never heard of it. They were biologists. They'd never heard of it. They had no idea the distinction between a living and a non-living thing. And here they were on television as great scientists, and they were talking about the pollution of Ottawa. And Mike went on television, and I was with him the day he collected it. One of the organisations, food packing organisations, was releasing fats into the river. He took a mass of this fat and made a bar of soap out of it and took it on television and said, there's what it can do. What I can do. The river was so badly polluted. But they knew nothing about this. But yet talked as if you must assume they do know about it. So, we saw that before. And somebody said, oh, that's only common sense. Well, all science starts with common sense. Where else can any science start with? There are three elements to common sense. Always three elements. First, there are basic principles. Easy basic principles. Easy practical judgments. Easy conclusions from them. That's where every science starts. Little child, my little niece. Uncle, she wasn't allowed to play with knives, of course, at 3 years of age. Would you cut my apple, please? Yeah, okay. I cut the apple, I handed her half, and put the other half behind my back. Where's the other half of my apple? I said, the half of an apple is the same as the whole apple? You kidding? That's crazy, she said, 3 years of age. My dear little niece, Michelle, had great difficulty coming into the world and went out with a very bad cancer at the age of about 37 or something, after adopting a baby and finding out she couldn't have children. She couldn't conceive. But easy basic principles, practical judgments, like for instance this practical judgment, come out of the rain or you'll get wet, or watch there are clouds, it's going to rain shortly. And then easy conclusions really from the basic principles. So I should have put this one first, it's probably this one second, this one third. So there's what evolution leads us to believe. You've got the greater coming out of the lesser. You've got a potency being actualized which it doesn't have. It doesn't have the potency. Utterly absurd. Just as my brother said what the basic absurdity is in the internal combustion engine, you have a brilliant employment of a bad system. Well, it's an interesting and brilliant thing, although not very brilliant, the theory of evolution. And up till about the 18th century, nobody took it seriously. Of course, the claim then is the church suppressed it. Well, if the church did, maybe it was just as well, but it wasn't the church. People would ignore it. It's just silly. Then they start to have all sorts of ideas. What kind of animals did we come from? Now, the latest is, of course, when scientists were saying it is obvious that we came from first parents, now they're talking about polygenesis. We came from many first parents. No evidence, just that it seems that way. Dr. Bonnet has been disputing with paleontologists, etc., on this. Now, what does a plant do? Is an animal a more perfect plant? No. The more perfect a plant is, the more perfectly is it divided away from being an animal. The soul of a rose bush makes it be a perfect rose bush, if it could be. And every apple tree would be perfect, but for the impediment of matter. The matter it has inherited impedes it from being perfect. I can remember the first time I heard that, somewhere 1950, when Woodbury said it one night, every apple tree would be perfect, but for the impediment of matter. Some of us can remember something, you know, Andrew. And, so an animal is not merely a more perfect plant. In fact, if a plant wanted to be perfect, it would be perfectly a plant, not an animal. It's utterly absurd. And every plant aspires to be a plant, not aspires to be a monkey or an elephant. I've always said, philosophically, we can say there's a very difference between an ant and an elephant. Funny, my students thought that was funny. You don't. By the way, I read of something today that intrigued me. It shows you how foolish people can talk. I read about a man in Alabama who was dying and left all his fortune to his widow. And she cannot collect it till she turns 14. So the form of a lower does not bestow upon the lower an appetite for the higher. So there'd have to be a real change of substance for the plant to become an animal, or for an animal to become man. A change of substance, not an accidental change, which the biologist is always pointing out. Accidental changes, not substantial changes. It might be that some stand up erect, while others still plod around on four limbs, claws, etc. But that's all accidental. That's not of the substance. That's things that belong to the substance, not the substance itself. So, if we said a plant became a brute, then we'd have a residual being that needs explaining. There are perfections in the brute which the plant doesn't have, and they need explanation. Where do they come from? You've got the greater coming out of the lesser without adequate cause. These go beyond what the biologist has to say. And I discovered that day when Mike and I've forgotten the other fellow's name, when we were doing about teaching, they were astounded at this stuff that I'm talking about. They gave a kind of a lecture on that. The form of a plant is the reason an organism is a plant, not the reason for becoming non-plant. So, can the lower have the seeds of the higher? For example, a monkey type have intellect without it being used or evident? No. Reform cannot be present without manifesting its formal effects. What do you think would happen if animals had intellect and they're quietly contemplating there? Are you going to tell me they're all great Einsteins or great St. Thomas or great Aristotelians? They would manifest the formal effects if they did have that form present. It's like saying, I've got a quarter here, it's red hot, but it doesn't produce any heat for you. It's got the form of heat, but it doesn't manifest its formal effects, namely, heat your hand. That would be absurd. And anyway, animals, we hear, suffer a lot. Well, if that is true, and it's greatly exaggerated in some quarters, because they give them human characteristics, if you want to read human characteristics, read The Wind in the Willows by Kenneth Grahame. A beautiful book. We had to study it at high school. About moles and toads and things like that.
Water rat.
Pardon?
And the water rat.
And the water rat, yeah.
And the badgers.
The badgers. Beautiful, isn't it? I remember an author saying when he didn't know what else to read, he went and read that again. He loved it so much. Well, if they had intellect present, they would know how to escape these difficulties they have in life. For instance, they'd form units. Let's get together, boys, and treat these humans. Next time the farmer comes in to whip his bull, we'll whip him, toss him over the fence. They'd benefit tremendously from the exercise of the human intellect if they had intellect present. The residual content of their souls, like the intellect and will, would be manifest. So it's absurd to suppose that there's something present which is not being, can't detect. And foreknowledge seems to be a requirement for the plant or animal to adapt to the new mode of being. And they would have to have this foreknowledge amongst themselves. And if they're going to become something, a brute is going to become a man, then this foreknowledge would be presumed before it had the intellect. In other words, it had the intellect before it had the intellect. It could think about things before it could think. Oh, I'm going to have intellect. I can give my form to a lower animal, to a lower thing. When a man generates a child, that it gives to the lower the form of a higher. Two vegetative beings, ovum and sperm. He gives those two vegetative beings a new formation, which is an apt and exacting matter for human form. And God, as we show, it's impossible for man to make that because the human soul exceeds the potency of the matter, so God creates that instantly at that time. So it takes 3 to generate that child. It's obviously a substantial change, but this is different from the above imposition of a new form by an organism on itself. Like, say, the monkey imposing upon himself that he has intellect. Could we say that when a horse eats grass, that the grass has evolved into a horse? Or perhaps more horse? No, the higher can elevate the lower, but the lower cannot produce out of itself the higher. So the horse eating the grass makes more horse. So the higher imposes on the lesser, the grass, or the steak that we eat, its own form, or at least suitability to become the horse or man. This is far different from a lesser causing itself to become the higher. This is all in the notes for you. And note also that the matter to be absorbed must have some appropriate quality. For horse or man do not eat just anything. We don't make a stew out of pebbles. We know that certain matter is appropriate. Aristotle and St. Thomas, following the biologists of his time, thought that there was an evolution of the embryo in the womb, spoken of today as delayed animation. That the child, first of all, is vegetative being, then it becomes a sensitive being, in other words, an animal, then it becomes rational. It has amazed me that St. Thomas didn't give that more thought. I don't understand what happened there. But 2 or 3 times, at least, I've seen in his work, that he says that there's an evolution within the woman's womb. And he was going on the biologist, and of course he would have thought that that was caused by God. He knew that. He could, the embryo couldn't cause that to itself. But they had macroscopic biology in their time, sort of with the naked eye. Now we've got microscopic biology, and we know more. And they're finding out more and more and more the enormous complexity of the human cell. It's enormous complex being, the zygote, the single fertilized ovum, is so complex that they're always discovering more and more. Everything that we have in our being now was in that single cell at that time. When I studied biology, we studied the cell, of course, and we knew about the vacuole and the epidermis, all the sorts of things we knew about it, but it's nothing compared to what they've discovered today, and it's terribly complex. Everything that we are now was there in miniature. Now, on account of our better knowledge of genetics, it is taught that man is formed immediately at conception. The reason that...
That's not because of genetics, it's because of philosophy.
Philosophy, yes, that's true. But we know the complexity of that. That's what I'm indicating here. When I was a student in philosophy, as Woodbury well pointed out, it was mirror image twins that caused, for instance, the church to wonder about that zygote in the womb. Was there delayed animation? Because the zygote was obviously split. You can't split a soul. It has no dimensions. So a mirror image twin is like as if you're looking in the mirror. One head on the left side, which the other has on the right side, etc., etc. And you're seeing that reflected. So the church thought, therefore, there was delayed animation. But today, we think that probably one split from the other. And sometimes some speak this way, that this twin of mine, he's my son, or he's my offspring, if you like to put it that way. There are different explanations of that. Some argue that evolutionary theory fits the facts and is therefore true. But one has to show that it is the only theory that fits the facts in order to be considered certain. There are other possible explanations which can fit the facts, the ones we've been dealing with all through this course. So we go on. There could be, St. Thomas explains there are 4 kinds of beings: vegetative, sensitive, locomotive, and rational, or intellective. I've asked biologists, can we name something which is not a brute, but is locomotive? Don't know, they say. Well, when I was in university, in biology, they used to talk about the ciliates, those little tiny one-celled animals with little feelers. They swam, these little feelers. Cilia, we call these cilia, eyelashes, but the cilia, the little feelers they have. And they are single-celled and locomotive. So there's a difficulty. The form of a sperm and an ovum are tendential beings, a tendency. They're goey beings was the Woodbury term, goey from one thing to another. The concept, the idea is a goey being. It goes beyond itself and tends to point in a direction for us. It doesn't exist for its own sake, but for other sakes. And St. Thomas beautifully talks about signs. A sign is a goey being. I have a slide somewhere at home taken in Wales. And these enormous names, Bigodos or some name like that, big name in Gaelic. I stood one day and asked a woman, I think it must have been 15 times, asked her to say the name of the town. It's supposed to be the longest name in the world. And she kept saying it for me. I think in the end she was going to clobber me when I said, would you say it once more? And it means the little village down near the glen, or something like that means in Welsh. But a sign is something which indicates another, not itself. St. John of St. Thomas and as Maritain both explain Thomistic teaching about the signs and signification, and this is what's been disturbing mankind today. They're finding out there are signs and signification, and modern philosophers had great difficulty with that. If they'd have seen St. Thomas, they wouldn't have had so much difficulty. They're tendential beings. Their attitude is, don't look at me, look at what I'm pointing to. So these signs, we can't understand their nature, their meaning of the words, but we can understand that they are signs pointing to something other than itself. What we used to call the zygote, a tendential being, a goey being. It's not there for its own sake, it's there for the development of man. So, it seems to be, the soul seems to be, to suggest the possibility of this production of a higher in the case of plants and animals. Maybe they are animals of a less perfect sign, which leaves the difficulty intact. If merely tactile sensation present, then how does this evolve to a higher, such as a horse, which has all the powers of sensitive life present? Well, it can only come out of it what's already in it. The potential for becoming other than itself has to be already there. Here's one of the difficulties. I drew a certain philosopher's attention to this that never occurred to him. That was obvious. But there are two uses of the term species. Take a snake and an elephant. They may be of the same species for the philosopher, but not for the biologist. Supposing somebody opened the door and a snake came in here, and came up here and looked over the class and said, "Who's in charge here?" That would be man. Probably we'd call it a serpentine man. If it's a particular species of man. Already they speak about different species of men. For instance, oriental hair has this shape. Ours has that shape when a cross section is made. And there's people who speak about different species of men. And the way they think is different. Even the French Canadians, my colleagues in the University of Ottawa, and I was teaching there, used to say, "You don't think like us, we think differently." Now, these men were bilingual, by the way, these French Canadians. But if something came from the philosopher, what powers are present? What soul, what powers? That makes him man of some kind. Maybe a different species of man, like the snake that could talk. Now, speech is a property of intellect, as we saw. So, if the snake comes in, then that's some species of man. If the elephant and the elephant have similar powers, well, therefore, they're both species of what? Elephant. Ain't that true? Sorry about that.
Going the other way, if a person has only vegetative life, they can't function, are they therefore not human?
No, they are human. They're not just the organs are defective. It's always in the
It's
organs.
an evil, okay.
See, if Paderewski, the great pianist, I heard him called Paderewski. Pardon? Paderewski. Thank you. Yeah. Grazie tanto. If Paderewski, pardon? Denado, grazie. Merci beaucoup. He says, we're trilingual in this class, but it used to be spoken about as the great pianist. We call it a pianist in Australia, they call it pianist here. And if he couldn't play, that doesn't mean he doesn't exist. If the piano keys are torn out, they say, we can't play, he's a lousy player. No, he's a good player. It's the organ that's dysfunctional. Well, when the brain gets damaged, the brain is the organ of the internal senses. The intellect is present, but it cannot function properly because of that. I've been told by people in Australia, by brothers who are looking after retarded boys, they said, you cannot know love till you've known these boys. They're fantastic. Up in the Lake Country, you know, there's a place there past Wyong, I've just forgotten exactly. Munmora, is it? That's right, that's where the power station is. My brother was the manager of that, I should know that. Anyway, that's the place, he built it too, incidentally. And this boys are talking to some of the brothers there, looking after the boys, and they said, these boys have a tremendous love, but they couldn't express themselves well with regard to intellectual things. But they knew enough to do the other. But that only says the organ is impeded or damaged or malformed, not that the soul is lacking. So we've got to be very careful of that, because they do manifest other means of showing their humanity. Just as the animals, if they have the seeds of humanity, they show it in some way too. So for the philosopher and the biologist, the philosopher goes on intelligible principles for a species, but the biologist goes on observation, principles of observation always. So we ask about evolution. How can they be so certain of evolution? Since only all their knowledge is acquired by observation, you can't observe the development of education. All you can say is, I observed this, I observed that. To say this developed from that, that's taking too big a step. They've got to prove that. So the term species has two meanings. So biologists, in speaking about a species, and a philosopher speaking about a species, have two different meanings. Both are correct and are operating within their discipline. The breeding of dogs, for example, Alsatians, Dachshunds, Tyons, there's a cross between the male tiger and female lion, and I know the people, I had long conversations with them who developed this at the Jungle Larry and Safari Jane Zoo in Naples, Florida. And Safari Jane, very nice blonde, was telling me about the development of the Tyons and Ligers that they developed. They had to use the mating call of the female and dangled it near the female, and the lion got this mating call and came and bred with her. They said the zoos around the world hated them for it. They don't like to mix the species. So they know the species merely based upon stripes and things like that, and the offspring of these things, tigerlons they call them, they had stripes like a lion. Chester Zoo, I saw horses that had been crossbred with zebras, and they had stripes. The horses had stripes. It was a funny looking animal. You'd say, what is it, a horse or a zebra? Oh, we've gone over time. I'm sorry, we promised to be very faithful to the time. We'll take it up from there next class. Yeah, I'm sorry.
I digress, but you talked about the common sense, and it looks so simple. You put those three things, but what's missing? We seem to lack the common sense. Something wrong,
Yeah.
I think. It's not
Oh,
common.
that's true.
When you talk about species, different species of man, are you talking more about the different races of man? I thought man is one species. It's just-
Well, philosophically, yes, but the biologists talk as if there might be another species of man based upon observable characters. That's why I'm illustrating. The philosopher and the biologist use the term species in different ways. All empirical science, chemistry, experimental physics, biology, etc., all base their science upon observation. In the last analysis, everything is observable. The philosopher analyzes, as Maritain beautifully brings out, his concepts always in terms of being, so they're intelligible. So, are there different species? I'm not proclaiming that there is.
But that seems to support polygenism.
But it does, yes, seem to support polygenism. That's to say
We
that there are
can't-
many origins of man.
That's not Christian teaching.
No, it's not Christian teaching.
We can't hold that.
But no, there are only small varieties, small. There might have been another variety of man, something like that. See, Chinese gentlemen would say, you don't think like us. So there is some difference, but it's only a minor difference. I mean, in human terms. Yeah, I know what you're saying, and you're quite right. But there is some justification in saying there are different ways of thinking. Now, for instance, I went in Spain, in the hill country. I've been in the homes of people there who lived in caves. You see a house, a door of a house, a very nice door, but just on a cliff face. Where does it lead? Inside all these caves where the people lived. And I went into them, and I smelled the goats, and I couldn't get out quick enough. But they think differently from us. And I asked the people there what difficulties they were having in life. And they got the answer, agua, water. Somebody cornered the market. Remember my talk about cornering markets in the the economic order, they cornered the market on water. Grabbed, I don't know how they did it, but something in the hills, and the people had to pay. And I gave them a silver 25 peseta coin, and I think it might have been a week's wages for them. I said, por agua, for water. And you could see the look of stunned look on their faces. 2 women. They were very friendly and gave the kids cookies. They were delighted. It was like taking a child, I suppose, here to McDonald's for something or other. But these kids were delighted just with a packet of cookies. Any other questions? Was there something else, I think? Okay, thank you very much.